In the cold expanse of space, where stars flickered like distant lanterns and planets drifted in silent orbits, a lone human soldier named Eric Thorne found himself far from home. His journey had begun on Earth, amidst the chaos of interstellar war, but it was here, aboard the alien vessel known as Zyrax's Wrath, that his fate would take an unexpected turn. Eric was no stranger to danger. Born into a military family, he had been trained since childhood to face the unknown with courage and resolve. His dark hair was cropped short, his jawline sharp from years of discipline, and his piercing blue eyes carried the weight of countless battles. Yet nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him now, a fate so bizarre, so twisted, that even his hardened heart struggled to comprehend it. The ship shuddered beneath his feet as he stood shackled in the dimly lit cargo bay. Alien guards, tall, insectoid creatures with chitinous armor and glowing green eyes, circled him like predators sizing up their prey. They clicked and chirped in their guttural language, occasionally jabbing at him with electrified spears whenever he shifted too much. Eric gritted his teeth against the pain, refusing to give them the satisfaction of hearing him cry out. He had faced worse odds before, or so he told himself. What made this situation particularly surreal was the reason for his capture. The aliens weren't interested in information or ransom. They didn't care about strategic advantage or political leverage. No, these beings, the Zyrakian hive, were cannibals. Their society revolved around consumption, not just of food but of life itself. To them, every living being was either sustenance or waste. And according to the translator device strapped to one of the guard's forearms, Eric had been selected for the Queen's Feast. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He had heard rumors during briefings back on Earth, whispers of a monstrous queen who ruled over her hive with unrelenting ferocity. She was said to be enormous, towering over her subjects like some ancient deity, with mandibles capable of tearing through steel. Her appetite was legendary, both literal and metaphorical. But none of those stories mentioned anything about ceremony or ritual. From what Eric understood, being chosen for the Queen's Feast meant death by digestion, an ignoble end for someone who had always imagined dying heroically on the battlefield. Still, despite the grim circumstances, Eric couldn't help but feel a spark of defiance burning within him. If there was one thing he'd learned in all his years of service, it was that survival often depended less on strength and more on wit. So, while his captors dragged him deeper into the bowels of the ship, he kept his ears open, his mind racing with possibilities. Every detail mattered: the way the guards communicated, the layout of the corridors, the faint hum of machinery pulsing through the walls. Somewhere in this labyrinth lay a chance to escape, or perhaps something greater. Eventually, they arrived at a massive chamber bathed in eerie red light. The air grew thick and humid, tinged with a metallic scent of blood. At the center of the room loomed a colossal throne carved from blackened bone, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to writhe under the shifting illumination. And seated upon it was the Queen herself. She was everything the legends promised and more. Her body stretched across the dais like a living mountain, her exoskeleton gleaming with iridescent hues. 6 limbs, each ending in razor-sharp claws, rested idly beside her, while her segmented tail curled protectively around the base of the throne. Most unsettling of all were her eyes, multifaceted orbs that glimmered with intelligence and hunger. When she spoke, her voice resonated like thunder, deep and commanding. "You are the offering," she declared, her words translated into fragmented human speech by the same device used earlier. "You will nourish me." Eric swallowed hard, his throat dry. This was it, the moment of truth. Somehow, though, instead of succumbing to fear, he felt a strange surge of determination. If he was going to die, he wouldn't do it quietly. Summoning every ounce of bravado he possessed, he lifted his chin and met her gaze. "I'm not exactly thrilled about being dinner," he replied, his tone laced with sarcasm. "But hey, if you're gonna eat me, can I at least get a last meal? Maybe a steak? Or is that asking too much?" The Queen tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the faint clicking of her claws against the throne. Then, to Eric's astonishment, she laughed, a sound like grinding stone and crashing waves combined. "You amuse me, little creature," she rumbled. "Perhaps you are more than mere sustenance." And with those enigmatic words, the course of Eric Thorne's life changed forever. As the Queen gazed upon Eric, Her thoughts churned with curiosity rather than hunger. She had seen countless offerings brought before her, each one trembling in terror, reduced to pleading or weeping. None had dared to challenge her authority, let alone mock it with such audacity. Yet here stood this fragile human, bound and outnumbered, yet defiant to the core. There was something undeniably intriguing about him, a spark of fire that refused to be extinguished. Her name was Vrinithra, though few outside her inner circle dared to speak it aloud. To most, she was simply the queen, an embodiment of power and dominance. Her reign over the Zyrakian hive spanned centuries, marked by conquests and feasts that left entire civilizations decimated. She ruled with absolute authority, her word law among her kind. Yet beneath her imposing exterior lay a complexity rarely glimpsed by others. Vrinithra was not merely a predator, she was a strategist, a thinker, and, at times, a dreamer. For decades, she had grown weary of the monotony of her existence. The endless cycle of hunting, feeding, and expanding her empire had begun to lose its allure. While her people thrived under her leadership, she often found herself yearning for something different. Something new. The arrival of the humans in their sector of space had initially seemed like just another opportunity to expand her dominion. But now, as she studied Eric, she sensed potential beyond mere conquest. "Bring him closer," she commanded, her voice reverberating through the chamber. The guards hesitated briefly. Such proximity to the queen was dangerous, even for them, but obeyed without question. They dragged Eric forward until he stood directly before her, close enough for her breath to wash over him in hot, humid waves. Despite his attempts to appear fearless, Eric couldn't suppress a shiver as her multifaceted eyes bore into him. "You dare to jest when facing your doom," Vrinithra mused, her tone almost playful. "Why do you not beg for mercy, as all others have done?" Eric clenched his fists, the chains rattling softly. "Mercy doesn't seem like your style," he shot back, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Besides, begging doesn't suit me." Vrinithra's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. She leaned forward slightly, her massive form looming over him like a storm cloud. "And what does suit you, human? Defiance? Bravery? Or perhaps, stupidity?" "Call it whatever you want," Eric replied with a shrug. "But I figure if I'm gonna go out, I might as well make it interesting." His response elicited another rumbling laugh from the queen, though this time it carried a note of genuine appreciation. "Interesting indeed," she murmured. Slowly, she extended one clawed limb toward him, stopping inches from his face. Eric flinched instinctively but held his ground, meeting her gaze unflinchingly. Her talons hovered there for a moment before retracting, leaving behind only the faintest trace of tension in the air. "You intrigue me," Vrinithra admitted, her tone softer now. "Most would cower before me, yet you stand tall. Tell me, human, what drives such insolence?" Eric hesitated, unsure how to answer. Honesty seemed like the safest route. "I guess I've got nothing left to lose," he said finally. "If you're gonna kill me, fine. But I'm not gonna roll over and play dead just because you're bigger and scarier than me." Vrinithra regarded him thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, including Eric's, she rose from her throne with a grace that belied her size. The chamber fell silent as she descended the dais, her movements deliberate and calculated. She circled him slowly, her claws clicking softly against the floor, her eyes scanning every inch of his form. Eric fought the urge to squirm under her scrutiny, reminding himself that showing weakness would only make things worse. "You are brave," she said at last, coming to a stop in front of him. "But bravery alone does not sustain life. You are weak, fragile, easily broken. Why should I spare you?" Eric opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. What could he say? That he deserved to live? That he had people waiting for him back home? Somehow, those arguments felt hollow in the face of her overwhelming presence. Instead, he opted for honesty once more. "Because sparing me might teach you something," he said quietly. "About us. About humans. We're not just meat, you know. We're survivors. Fighters. Maybe we could show you something you haven't seen before." Vrinithra tilted her head, considering his words. For a moment, the chamber seemed suspended in time, the tension palpable. Then, to Eric's astonishment, and the evident shock of her guards, she reached out and snapped the chains binding his wrists. "Very well," she declared, her voice echoing like a verdict. "You shall remain alive, for now. But mark my words, human, if you prove unworthy of my interest, you will still meet your end. Do not mistake this reprieve for mercy." Eric rubbed his sore wrists, trying to process what had just happened. He wasn't dead. Not yet, anyway. As absurd as it sounded, he realized he might actually have a chance, not just to survive, but to change the course of his fate entirely. In the days that followed, Eric found himself navigating a world unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Released from his bonds but still confined within the vast chambers of the Zyrakian hive, he quickly discovered that freedom came with its own set of challenges. The Queen Vernithra had decreed that he was to be treated neither as prisoner nor as food, for now, but her decision sparked confusion and resentment among her subjects. Whispers echoed through the shadowy corridors, accompanied by wary glances whenever Eric passed by. It was clear that many of the hive dwellers viewed him as an anomaly, a disruption to their carefully ordered existence. To survive, Eric knew he needed allies, or at least someone willing to tolerate him. His first breakthrough came unexpectedly, in the form of a young Zyrakian drone named Calyx. Unlike the towering warriors who guarded the queen, Calyx was smaller and more slender, his exoskeleton a lighter shade of amber. He moved with a nervous energy, constantly darting his multifaceted eyes around as though expecting trouble. When Eric caught him sneaking scraps of food into his quarters late one night, the two struck up an uneasy truce. "You shouldn't be helping me," Eric said cautiously, watching Calyx fidget with a bundle of what looked like dried meat. "If they catch you—" "They already think I'm strange," Calyx replied in halting, translated speech. "One more oddity won't matter." He pushed the bundle toward Eric. "Eat. You'll need strength." Grateful for the gesture, Eric accepted the offering, chewing slowly as he observed his unlikely benefactor. Over time, their interactions grew more frequent, and Calyx began sharing fragments of information about the hive's inner workings. Through him, Eric learned that the Zyrakians were not mindless beasts but a highly structured society driven by roles and hierarchy. Each individual served a specific purpose, from the lowliest worker drones to the elite warriors who protected the queen. Even the act of consuming others was steeped in ritual and symbolism, representing the transfer of life force rather than mere sustenance. Despite these insights, adapting to life among the Zyrakians remained a constant struggle. The environment itself was hostile, with jagged walls and narrow passageways that seemed designed to intimidate intruders. The air was heavy with moisture and carried the faint tang of decay, making breathing difficult after prolonged exposure. Sleep proved equally challenging. Eric often woke to the sound of skittering legs or the ominous clatter of approaching guards. Still, he refused to give in to despair. Instead, he focused on learning everything he could about his captors, hoping to find a weakness or exploit that might aid in his eventual escape. His efforts did not go unnoticed. One evening, as he sat cross-legged on the cold floor of his quarters, sketching crude diagrams of the hive's layout in the dirt, Vernithra appeared without warning. Her sudden presence startled him, causing him to scramble to his feet. She loomed over him, her massive frame blocking out the dim light from the corridor. "What are you plotting?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Do you intend to betray my trust?" "No," Eric replied quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm just trying to understand. To adapt." Vernithra studied him for a long moment, her eyes glinting like shards of obsidian. Finally, she gestured for him to continue. "Show me." Hesitant but unwilling to defy her outright, Eric knelt back down and pointed to his crude map. "This is where I think the main ventilation system is located. If I can access it, I might be able to—" He trailed off, realizing how incriminating his words sounded. Clearing his throat, he added hastily, "I mean, it's useful knowledge." "Right." To his surprise, Vernithra chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the chamber. "Clever," she remarked, "but futile. Escape is impossible. However," she paused, tilting her head slightly, "your resourcefulness intrigues me. Perhaps there is value in keeping you close. From that day forward, Eric's status within the hive shifted subtly. Though still under constant surveillance, he was granted limited freedom to explore certain areas under Calyx's watchful eye. The queen herself began summoning him regularly, engaging him in conversations that ranged from philosophical debates to discussions about human culture. These exchanges revealed a side of Renithra that few, if any, had ever witnessed, a keen intellect hidden beneath layers of brutality and tradition. Yet even as Eric gained a measure of acceptance, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Many of the hive's inhabitants viewed him as an affront to their way of life, a symbol of weakness tolerated only because of the queen's indulgence. Skirmishes became commonplace, with rival drones attempting to provoke him into acts of aggression that could justify his removal. More than once, Eric found himself dodging blows or wrestling opponents twice his size, relying on quick reflexes and sheer stubbornness to stay alive. Through it all, he maintained his resolve, clinging to the hope that his presence might sow seeds of change within the hive. Whether those changes would ultimately benefit him or seal his doom remained to be seen. Life in the Zyrakian hive was a delicate balancing act, a dance of survival that required equal parts cunning and humility. Eric Thorne quickly realized that blending in wasn't an option. His humanity made him conspicuous no matter what he did. Instead, he embraced the role of the outsider, using his unique position to observe, learn, and adapt. The queen's unpredictable fascination with him provided a shield of sorts, but it also painted a target on his back. Every step he took was scrutinized, every word weighed for hidden meaning. In this hostile environment, humor became one of his most potent tools, a way to diffuse tension, earn reluctant respect, and remind himself that he was still, somehow, alive. One incident stood out as particularly emblematic of his precarious existence. It began innocuously enough, with Eric accompanying Calyx on one of their rare excursions to the hive's lower levels. These trips were part scavenger hunt, part reconnaissance mission, allowing Eric to gather scraps of knowledge about the hive's infrastructure while ensuring he didn't starve. On this particular day, they stumbled upon a group of warrior drones engaged in combat training. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Sleek, insectoid bodies moving with lethal precision, their claws flashing in the dim light as they clashed and parried. Calyx tugged urgently at Eric's sleeve, urging him to retreat, but Eric waved him off. "Relax," he whispered. "We're just passing through." Unfortunately, one of the warriors noticed them. A hulking brute with serrated mandibles and a scarred exoskeleton, he broke away from the group and stalked toward them, his tail lashing menacingly. "What business do you have here, soft skin?" he growled, his voice distorted by the translator device clipped to his thorax. "Just sightseeing," Eric replied with a nonchalant shrug. "Nice moves, by the way. Ever consider a career in dance?" The warrior froze, clearly baffled by the comment. Behind him, several of his comrades paused mid-fight, their heads swiveling in unison to stare at the human. Calyx groaned softly, burying his face in his claws. "Dance?" the warrior repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. "You insult us?" Eric grinned, spreading his arms wide in mock apology. "No offense meant. I just figured you guys could use a little variety. All that slashing and stabbing must get boring after a while." For a heartbeat, the chamber was utterly silent. Then, to Eric's astonishment, the warrior threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the walls. His companions joined in, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic clatter of their claws against the floor. Even Calyx cracked a smile, though he still looked ready to bolt at a moment's notice. "You are strange," the warrior said finally, shaking his head. "But amusing. Go, before I decide to test my blade on you." With that, they were allowed to leave unharmed. As they hurried back to safer territory, Calyx shot Eric a reproachful glance. "That was reckless," he muttered. "You cannot taunt them like that." "Worked, didn't it?" Eric countered, smirking. "Sometimes, you just gotta laugh in the face of danger." Not all encounters ended so light-heartedly, however. Days later, Eric found himself cornered in a narrow passageway by a trio of worker drones who had taken exception to his growing influence within the hive. They surrounded him, their pincers snapping audibly as they closed in. "The queen grows weak," one of them hissed. "She wastes her time on you," soft skin. You will bring ruin to us all. Eric raised his fists, knowing full well that he was outmatched. Hey, buddy, he quipped, forcing a grin despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. Ever heard the phrase, pick on someone your own size? The lead drone lunged, but Eric ducked, driving his shoulder into the creature's midsection. The impact sent the drone stumbling backward, colliding with one of its companions. Seizing the opportunity, Eric kicked out, connecting solidly with another drone's leg joint. The resulting screech of pain drew the attention of nearby guards, who intervened before the situation escalated further. Later, as he nursed a bruised rib in his quarters, Eric reflected on the incident. Humor had saved him once again, buying precious seconds that turned the tide in his favor. Yet it also highlighted the fragility of his position. For every moment of levity, there were countless others filled with menace and uncertainty. The hive was a powder keg, and he was the spark threatening to ignite it. Amidst the chaos, moments of connection offered fleeting solace. During one of his regular audiences with Vernithra, she asked him about Earth, a topic that never failed to elicit mixed emotions. "Tell me of your homeworld," she commanded, reclining on her bone-carved throne. "Is it truly as insignificant as my advisors claim?" Eric hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It depends on who you ask," he said finally. "To some, it's just dirt and water. To others, it's everything." Vernithra's mandibles twitched curiously. "Explain." So he did, painting vivid pictures of sunsets over oceans, bustling cities alive with music and laughter, and quiet forests where the wind whispered secrets through the trees. He spoke of humanity's flaws, its greed, its wars, but also its resilience, creativity, and capacity for kindness. By the time he finished, Vernithra's expression had softened, her eyes reflecting a hint of wonder. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Such contradiction, such beauty." Moments like these reminded Eric why he fought so hard to endure. Not just for survival, but for the possibility of bridging the gap between species. If he could make even the smallest difference, if he could show these creatures that humans were more than mere prey, then perhaps his ordeal would not be in vain. Yet as the days turned into weeks, the stakes grew higher. Rumors spread throughout the hive of unrest among the warrior caste, whispers of rebellion brewing in the shadows. Loyalties shifted, alliances fractured, and the line between friend and foe blurred dangerously. Eric knew that sooner or later, the fragile peace holding the hive together would shatter. When that happened, he would need every ounce of wit, courage, and luck he possessed to navigate the storm. Unbeknownst to Eric, the growing discontent within the Zyrakian hive was reaching a boiling point. The warriors, long accustomed to unquestioned loyalty and adherence to tradition, began to view Vernithra's leniency toward the human as a sign of weakness. Their dissatisfaction simmered beneath the surface, manifesting in subtle acts of defiance, delayed orders, muttered grievances, and increasingly aggressive encounters with Eric himself. Among them, a particularly ambitious warrior named Ziron emerged as a vocal critic of the Queen's decisions. Towering even above his peers, with burnished black carapace and jagged scars crisscrossing his exoskeleton, Ziron commanded respect through sheer intimidation. He saw Eric not as a curiosity but as a threat, a symbol of the Queen's wavering resolve that needed to be eliminated. Ziron's disdain for Eric culminated one fateful evening when the human ventured into the central nexus of the hive, a sprawling chamber lined with pulsating organic conduits and humming machinery. Tasked by Vernithra to observe the hive's energy systems, Eric wandered cautiously, sketching notes and marveling at the alien technology. The air buzzed with latent power, and the faint glow of bioluminescent veins illuminated his path. It was during this exploration that Ziron confronted him, flanked by a small cadre of loyalists. "You tread where you do not belong, soft skin," Ziron snarled, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. "This place is forbidden to your kind." Eric straightened, clutching his makeshift notebook tightly. "I'm here on the Queen's orders," he replied evenly, though his pulse quickened. "Maybe you should take it up with her." Ziron's mandibles clicked furiously, a sign of barely contained rage. "The Queen has grown complacent, distracted by your insolence. She forgets her duty to the hive. But we remember." With a swift motion, he unsheathed a curved blade from his side, its edge gleaming ominously. "You will die here, and the hive will be rid of your corruption." Before Eric could react, the warriors lunged, their movements synchronized and deadly. Instinct took over as he sidestepped the first strike, grabbing a loose conduit pipe from the wall to use as a makeshift weapon. Sparks flew as metal clashed against chitin, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Ziron's followers circled him, forcing him to pivot constantly to avoid their attacks. Sweat dripped down Eric's brow as he parried blow after blow, his improvised defense growing weaker with each clash. Just as exhaustion began to weigh heavily on him, a familiar skittering noise echoed through the chamber. Calyx burst into view, brandishing a stolen spear and shouting incoherently in his native tongue. The distraction gave Eric the opening he needed. He slammed the pipe into one warrior's knee joint, sending it crashing to the ground. Another drone hesitated, confused by the sudden appearance of the smaller Zyrakian. Seizing the moment, Eric swung the pipe upward, striking the warrior squarely in the thorax and knocking it off balance. Ziron roared in fury, charging forward with reckless abandon. Eric braced himself, but before the warrior could reach him, a deafening roar split the air. Vrinithra herself descended into the chamber, her massive form casting a shadow over the combatants. Her tail lashed violently, and her multifaceted eyes burned with fury. "Enough!" she bellowed, her voice shaking the very foundations of the hive. The warriors immediately froze, their weapons lowering in deference to their queen. Ziron hesitated, his blade trembling in his grip, but ultimately he stepped back, bowing his head in submission. Vrinithra advanced, her claws clicking ominously against the floor. "You dare to challenge my authority?" she demanded, fixing her gaze on Ziron. "You dare to spill blood within my domain without my consent?" "My queen," Ziron stammered, his usual bravado evaporating under her wrath. "This human is under my protection," Vrinithra interrupted, her tone icy. "He is mine to command, mine to judge. Your actions today are an affront to the hive and to me. Leave my sight, lest I decide to make an example of you." Without another word, Ziron and his followers retreated, their tails dragging in shame. Once they were gone, Vrinithra turned her attention to Eric, who leaned heavily against the wall, breathing hard. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his forearm, but otherwise, he seemed intact. "You are injured," she observed, her voice softer now. "Come, let us tend to your wounds." Eric nodded numbly, following her out of the chamber. As they walked, he glanced back at Calyx, who lingered nervously in the doorway. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. The smaller Zyrakian gave a hesitant nod before disappearing into the shadows. Back in Vrinithra's private quarters, Eric found himself seated on a raised platform while the queen applied a viscous, amber-colored substance to his wound. The gel cooled instantly, sealing the cut and easing the sting. Despite the situation, he couldn't help but marvel at the efficiency of Zyrakian medicine. "You risk much by aiding me," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Both of you." Vrinithra paused, her claws hovering momentarily before continuing her work. "Risk is inherent to leadership," she replied. "I chose to spare you, to keep you close. That choice carries consequences. For me, for you, for the hive. But I will not apologize for it." Eric studied her profile, noting the tension in her posture. "Why me?" he asked suddenly. "Out of all the humans you've captured, why am I different?" Vrinithra was silent for a long moment, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim light. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that sent a shiver down Eric's spine. "Because you remind me of myself," she admitted. "Once, I too questioned the ways of our kind. I sought change, growth, understanding. But time and necessity hardened me. Perhaps, through you, I can rediscover what I have lost." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eric realized then that his survival was no longer just about staying alive, it was about something far greater. Whether he liked it or not, he had become a catalyst, a focal point for forces beyond his comprehension. And as the hive teetered on the brink of upheaval, he knew that the choices he made next would shape not only his destiny but the future of the Zyrakian hive itself. In the days that followed, an uneasy calm settled over the Zyrakian hive. The Queen's public reprimand of Ziron had quelled overt acts of rebellion, but the underlying tension remained palpable. Whispers of dissent continued to ripple through the corridors, carried by drones and warriors alike. Some viewed Vernithra's protection of Eric as a betrayal of their traditions, while others saw it as a necessary evolution, a bold step toward a new era for their species. Amidst this divide, Eric found himself thrust into an unprecedented role: mediator, provocateur, and unwitting symbol of change. Vernithra, for her part, seemed determined to assert her dominance while exploring the possibilities Eric represented. She summoned him frequently, engaging him in debates that tested the limits of his knowledge and patience. Topics ranged from the ethics of consumption to the nature of free will, each conversation revealing more about the complexities of her character. Beneath her fearsome exterior lay a mind hungry for understanding, a ruler grappling with the weight of legacy and responsibility. Eric, though wary, couldn't deny the intellectual challenge she presented. He often found himself losing track of time, absorbed in discussions that blurred the lines between adversary and ally. Yet even as their bond deepened, external pressures mounted. Ziron, emboldened by covert support from factions within the warrior caste, began orchestrating clandestine meetings to rally opposition against the Queen. His rhetoric grew increasingly inflammatory, painting Eric as a harbinger of destruction and Vernithra as a relic of a bygone age. Calyx, whose loyalty to Eric had earned him suspicion among his peers, became a key informant, relaying updates on the growing unrest. The young drone's reports painted a grim picture. The hive was fracturing, its unity eroding under the strain of conflicting ideologies. One evening, as Eric sat cross-legged on the floor of his quarters, poring over sketches of the hive's layout, Calyx appeared in the doorway, visibly agitated. "They plan something big," he whispered urgently, his multifaceted eyes darting nervously. "Ziron gathers followers. They speak of overthrowing the Queen." Eric frowned, setting aside his notes. "When?" "Soon," Calyx replied. "Perhaps tonight. They believe the Queen is distracted by her interest in you." The implications hit Eric like a punch to the gut. If Ziron succeeded, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for him, but for Vernithra and the entire hive. He rose to his feet, pacing the small space as his mind raced. "We need to warn her," he said finally. "She deserves to know." Calyx hesitated, his claws twitching anxiously. "If we go to her now, they will see us. They watch everything." Eric clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Then we'll have to be smarter than them," he muttered. Turning to Calyx, he added, "Can you get me to the central chamber without being seen?" The drone considered the question, his expression conflicted. Finally, he nodded. "There is a way. But it is dangerous." "Dangerous is better than dead," Eric replied grimly. "Let's move." Under the cover of darkness, they navigated the labyrinthine passages of the hive, sticking to shadowy alcoves and abandoned tunnels. Calyx led the way, his smaller frame allowing him to slip through tight spaces with ease. Eric followed closely, his heart pounding as they skirted patrols of suspicious drones. The air grew colder and damper the deeper they went, until they reached a narrow maintenance shaft that opened into the central nexus. Peering cautiously into the chamber, Eric spotted Vernithra perched atop her bone-carved throne, seemingly lost in thought. Around her, the bioluminescent veins pulsed rhythmically, casting an ethereal glow over the scene. Taking a deep breath, Eric stepped into the open, raising his hands to signal his peaceful intent. "My queen," he called softly, his voice carrying just enough to reach her ears. Vernithra's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him. Before she could speak, Eric hurried forward, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Ziron is planning an uprising. He means to overthrow you tonight." Vernithra rose slowly, her massive form radiating authority. "How do you know this?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "Calyx told me," Eric explained, gesturing to the drone cowering nervously behind him. "He's been watching them. They're gathering followers, preparing to strike." For a moment, Vernithra said nothing, her gaze fixed intently on Eric. Then, with a sudden movement, she extended one clawed limb toward him, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Eric gasped, struggling briefly before realizing she wasn't harming him, merely examining him closely. "You risk much to bring me this warning," she rumbled, her voice tinged with something akin to admiration. "Why?" Eric met her gaze, his expression resolute. "Because I owe you my life," he replied honestly. "And because I believe in what you're trying to do. Change isn't easy, but it's worth fighting for." Vrinithra lowered him gently back to the ground, her mandibles twitching thoughtfully. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish," she mused. "Perhaps both." Before either of them could say more, a commotion erupted at the edge of the chamber. Ziran and his followers stormed in, their weapons drawn and their expressions murderous. "Enough of your games, Queen," Ziran shouted, pointing an accusatory claw at Eric. "Tonight, we reclaim our destiny." The confrontation unfolded swiftly, a chaotic clash of wills and weapons. Vrinithra unleashed her full fury, her tail lashing like a whip as she dispatched several warriors with brutal efficiency. Eric, armed with a discarded spear, fought alongside her, his movements fueled by desperation and adrenaline. Calyx darted in and out of the fray, using his agility to distract and disarm opponents. Together, the unlikely trio held their ground, turning the tide against the rebels. As the dust settled, Ziran lay defeated, his battered form groveling at Vrinithra's feet. The queen regarded him coldly, her voice cutting through the silence. "You have betrayed me, Ziran. Betrayed the hive. For this, there is only one punishment." With a swift, decisive motion, she plunged her claws into his thorax, ending his life instantly. The remaining rebels dropped their weapons, bowing in submission as Vrinithra addressed the assembled crowd. "This is my hive," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "My laws. My vision. Any who oppose me henceforth will share Ziran's fate." The chamber fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. As the surviving drones dispersed, Vrinithra turned to Eric, her expression unreadable. "You have proven yourself today," she said quietly. "More than I expected." Eric wiped sweat from his brow, his chest heaving with exertion. "Does this mean I'm off the menu?" he quipped weakly, earning a rare chuckle from the queen. "For now," she replied, her tone teasing yet firm. "But do not mistake my gratitude for leniency. You are still mine, Eric Thorn, and I do not relinquish what belongs to me." Her words sent a shiver down his spine, but not entirely from fear. In that moment, standing amidst the aftermath of battle, Eric realized that his journey was far from over. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He had forged a bond unlike any other, a bond that would shape the destinies of both human and hive in ways neither could have anticipated. The aftermath of the rebellion left an indelible mark on the Zyrakian hive. The once unified society now bore the scars of division, its corridors quieter but charged with a fragile tension. Vrinithra's decisive victory over Ziran had restored order, but it also signaled a turning point, a shift in the hive's rigid hierarchy. For the first time in centuries, questions about tradition and change began to ripple through the collective consciousness of her people. And at the center of it all stood Eric Thorn, the human who had defied every expectation. In the days that followed, Vrinithra retreated into deep contemplation, spending long hours alone atop her bone-carved throne. Eric, no longer confined to his quarters, wandered the hive cautiously, aware that his presence still stirred mixed feelings among its inhabitants. Some regarded him with grudging respect, acknowledging his role in thwarting the uprising. Others continued to view him as an outsider, a disruption to their way of life. Yet even those who disliked him couldn't deny the subtle changes taking root within the hive. One such change was evident in Calyx. The young drone, emboldened by his pivotal role in warning Eric and the Queen, began advocating for greater tolerance among his peers. He organized small gatherings in secluded chambers, where curious drones gathered to hear stories of Earth and humanity. Eric, initially hesitant to participate, eventually found himself drawn into these sessions, sharing tales of art, music, and innovation that left his alien audience both fascinated and bewildered. "You humans are strange," one of the drones remarked during one such session, tilting its head quizzically. "You create beauty not for survival, but for enjoyment?" Eric smiled, leaning back against a wall adorned with glowing fungal patches. "Yeah, I guess we do. It's not always logical, but it's what makes us, Well, us. The drone clicked thoughtfully, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the soft light. Perhaps there is wisdom in your strangeness. These moments of connection gave Eric hope, but they also weighed heavily on him. Despite the progress he'd made, he couldn't shake the feeling that his place in the hive was temporary. He was still an outsider, a guest, or perhaps a prisoner, at the mercy of a queen whose motives remained inscrutable. Vrinithra's claim that he belonged to her lingered uncomfortably in his mind, raising questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. It was during one of their private conversations that the truth finally came to light. Summoned to the central chamber late one evening, Eric found Vrinithra seated on her throne, her massive form bathed in the dim red glow of bioluminescent veins. She gestured for him to approach, her expression unreadable. "You have done much for me," she began, her voice resonating like distant thunder. "More than any other being has dared. Yet I sense unease within you. Speak freely, Eric Thorn. What troubles you?" Eric hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, for sparing my life, for protecting me. But I can't help wondering why. Why keep me here? Why risk so much for someone like me?" Vrinithra tilted her head slightly, her mandibles twitching as though savoring the question. "When I first saw you," she replied slowly, "I saw defiance, strength, a spark of something rare and precious. You reminded me of what I once was, before duty and necessity hardened me. Through you, I sought to rediscover that part of myself." Her admission caught Eric off guard. "And now?" he asked softly. "Now?" She paused, her multifaceted eyes glinting with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Now I see more than just defiance. I see potential. Not merely for myself, but for my people. Your presence challenges us, forces us to question who we are and who we could become. That is why I cannot let you go. Not yet." Eric swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. "So I'm not just a curiosity anymore," he said wryly. "I'm an experiment." "You are far more than that," Vrinithra countered firmly. "You are a catalyst. Whether you realize it or not, you have already begun to change us. And perhaps we may yet change you." Her gaze held his, unwavering and intense. In that moment, Eric understood the depth of her conviction, and the complexity of her feelings. She didn't see him merely as a tool or a trophy. She saw him as a partner, albeit in a relationship unlike any he could have imagined. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. As the days turned into weeks, the hive continued to evolve under Vrinithra's guidance. Inspired by Eric's stories, some of the drones began experimenting with new forms of expression, creating intricate patterns on the walls using bioluminescent fungi or crafting melodic rhythms by tapping against the hive's organic conduits. These acts of creativity, though small, represented a seismic shift in Zyrakian culture, a move away from pure functionality toward something deeper and more meaningful. Ziran's rebellion, though crushed, served as a catalyst for broader reforms. Vrinithra convened councils of advisors, inviting representatives from all castes to voice their concerns and propose solutions. Eric attended several of these meetings, offering insights gleaned from his knowledge of human governance. While his suggestions were met with skepticism at times, they also sparked lively debates that pushed the hive toward greater inclusivity and cooperation. Yet even as the hive embraced change, Eric knew he couldn't stay forever. His heart ached for Earth, for the familiar skies and faces he had left behind. During one quiet evening, as he sat alone in his quarters sketching designs for a device that might help bridge communication between species, Vrinithra appeared unannounced. "I know you wish to return home," she said without preamble, her voice softer than usual. "Do not deny it. I see it in your eyes." Eric set down his pencil, meeting her gaze steadily. "I won't lie to you," he admitted. "I miss Earth. My family. My friends. But I don't want to leave if it means undoing everything we've built here." Vrinithra stepped closer, her towering form casting a shadow over him. "You misunderstand me, Eric Thorn. I do not seek to keep you here against your will. If anything, I owe you freedom, for all that you have given us." Her words struck him like a blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. "What are you saying?" he asked finally. "I am saying that it is time," she replied. "Time for you to return to your world. But not empty-handed." With a graceful movement, she extended one clawed limb, revealing a small crystalline orb nestled within her grasp. "This contains knowledge of our kind, our language, our history, our ways. It is a gift, a token of gratitude. Perhaps in time, your people and mine may find common ground." Tears welled up in Eric's eyes as he accepted the orb, its surface cool and smooth beneath his fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Vrinithra inclined her head, her expression tender yet resolute. "Go, Eric Thorn. Share your story. Show them that even the most unlikely bonds can bring about change." The journey back to Earth was bittersweet. Guided by Calyx and a contingent of loyal drones, Eric boarded a sleek Zyrakian vessel equipped with advanced navigation systems designed to ensure his safe passage. As the ship ascended into the stars, he gazed out the viewport, watching the hive grow smaller until it vanished entirely. Though he was eager to reunite with his loved ones, a part of him would always belong to the alien world he had left behind. Upon his return, Eric became a beacon of hope and understanding, using the knowledge contained within the crystalline orb to foster dialogue between humanity and the Zyrakians. Diplomatic missions were launched, cultural exchanges initiated, and tentative alliances formed. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but for the first time in history, two vastly different species dared to imagine a shared future. And somewhere, light years away, Vrinithra watched the stars, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the infinite possibilities of what lay ahead.